Man, do I miss the George Lucas era of Star Wars. What a time to grow up in the late 90s and early 2000s when Star Wars was at peak creativity. Now, of course, there was always expansive supplemental material on top of the core films in between the creation of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. But the prequel era hype inspired an explosion of stories to be shared. The best part about this was that not all those stories took place around the prequel era. Many of those stories came out in the medium of books. But the early 2000s were of course infamous for a boom in another fastly growing medium: the video game. Boy did Star Wars games cook back then, man. It felt like every year we had a new edition that made you able to immerse yourself in the world of Star Wars. You could literally become different characters and live out experiences of different types of archetypes. You could be a pod racer, a commando clone unit, a mercenary from the Ancient Republic, a Sith apprentice. Regardless of what it was, you were able to gain a large appreciation for the massive world building that is Star Wars. And it all felt very coherent, something that we took for granted before
the dark times, before the Empire.
The particular experience that I wanted to highlight today was an experience that took place right in the middle of the prequel era's development. Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast. Now, this is technically not the first game in the franchise. There were a couple of games that came before it in the 90s, and two of these games followed the protagonist of Jedi Outcast, Kyle Katarn. These early games were not exactly a part of my developmental experience as a gamer, so I'm not going to talk about them at length, but they are important to mention in the sense that it creates a foundation for the story that is shown to us in Outcast, and the following game, Jedi Academy, that I will probably make a separate video about. The character of Kyle Katarn made these games some of the most compelling Star Wars media for me personally. The reason for this being that Kyle represents a question that I think the original trilogy sets up, but due to the nature of its storytelling and structure doesn't really explore thoroughly. That question being, what if a normal person had the Force? You could argue that Luke Skywalker was the first exploration of this concept, but Luke's character arc is a more spiritual metaphor, going from thesis to antithesis to synthesis throughout the trilogy. Luke is an idealized representation of finding balance after going through both the hero's journey and the hero's deconstruction. He starts as a rational boy, grounded in normal life, who strongly desires to embrace instinct and adventure. His arc in the first film is to find that instinct and act upon it. The Empire Strikes Back flips this thesis on its head and teaches Luke that instinct without rationality is foolishness. Once Luke can embrace what is, he can find balance in confronting reality, but trusts in his instincts when it comes to the wisdom and values that he has learned on his journey. Luke ultimately becomes a symbol for the Eastern spiritual concept of yin and yang. Hell, it's even reflected in the colors of clothing that he's wearing at the beginning and the end of the films. Kyle, however, is not symbolic in the same way in his character archetype. Kyle is an everyman. If you inserted the average adult male fan of Star Wars in the 90s into Star Wars, you might have someone a bit like Kyle Katarn. As this character, you would use whatever resources are advantageous to you to achieve your goals. You would fall in love with a woman that you went on adventures with. You might speak your mind when confronted, but above all else, you would take control of your own destiny. The concepts of stoicism, emotion, and discipline would have contextual, nuanced meanings to different parts of your life. You would be less of a warrior samurai monk and more of a cowboy. Ironically, Star Wars has this type of archetype fairly commonly as a side character, and that would be the role of the mercenary. Sometimes this takes the form of an independent scoundrel, but often is portrayed in the form of a bounty hunting profession in the universe. Either way, they would describe themselves this way.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Kyle Katarn fits this characteristic perfectly. In fact, the game starts with him and his companion, Jan Ors, fulfilling a mercenary contract for the New Republic. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Jedi Outcast is actually a sequel to another sequel. To gain context of who these characters are, it's helpful to understand the timeline leading up to Jedi Outcast. The series started as a Doom clone called Dark Forces in 1995. In this game, you play as Kyle, working as a contractor for the Rebellion during the actual time of Imperial rule. But he has worked for both sides at one time or another. He is not a hero in the traditional sense, nor is his call to action rooted in the traditional hero's journey. He is literally just a conduit for the good guys to use as a stopping force for the Imperial overreach. The premise of the game is extremely simple. You get hired to do a job, you blow up an Imperial operation, and you get a medal for it. It is only in the sequel to Dark Forces, a game subtitled Jedi Knight, that we actually get more of a traditional hero's journey arc for Kyle. In this game, we get to see the archetype of the mercenary shift into the archetype of the noble warrior. As laid out in Joseph Campbell's telling of the hero's journey, Kyle starts out in the ordinary world as a mercenary working with his partner, only to receive a call to action after his father is killed by a dark Jedi. He goes through sequences of conflict with opposing forces, is given guidance by mentors along the way, only to come to the innermost cave and confront the ordeal that is his father's killer. He walks away with the responsibility that his father had of protecting the location of the magical Valley of the Jedi, this game's example of the hero's elixir outlined in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, that the dark Jedi set off to exploit. He gets to honor his father's memory. Crossing this threshold logically would lead into a journey much like Luke Skywalker's in the subsequent games. But Jedi Outcast decided to embrace the personality of Kyle Katarn and skip over the antithesis of the hero's journey. Somehow, in the time between games, Kyle has lost his connection to the Force and the Jedi. He goes back to living a normal life in the ordinary world that he came from. Where Luke leaned into his identity, Kyle rejects his. As a result, he must confront his responsibility in a way where he must relive his former journey, but in a less one-dimensional way. If one was to play this game without any context, which is exactly how I played it originally, this character would feel like a completely fresh take on what a Jedi is supposed to be. Ironically, Kyle Katarn is mentored and taught by Luke Skywalker himself. In his early escapades as a Jedi, he joined Luke's new academy in the New Republic era and began to learn from the quintessential example of the hero's journey himself. Interestingly, though, given the context of the prequel trilogy, Luke is actually a symbol of what the ideal Jedi is compared to the dogmatic ideas presented in the prior era. He reached what I referred to earlier as a synthesis. In Star Wars terms, they call this balance. Instead of holding on to the views that emotion leads to the dark side, Luke Skywalker channeled his emotion in a way that was healthy. We even see a value that he puts on attachment, something that used to be forbidden in the Jedi Order. As a result, we have a Zen master who encourages things to trend towards peace, but allows there to be natural conflict that comes with both relationships and disagreements that come from those relationships. We see this example of wise leadership in his interactions with Kyle. He encourages Kyle in a certain direction, but he does not try to control him. He allows him to leave the Jedi Order and welcomes him back with open arms when he feels the need to embrace that part of himself again. Now, you might be asking me at this point, if you've never played the games, why would Kyle go back to the Jedi? I thought you said he decided to go back to his life as a mercenary. Well, yes, I kinda skipped over the whole beginning of the game. You see, in his mercenary adventures against the remnant of the Empire, Kyle comes face to face with yet another Dark Jedi. This Dark Jedi's name is Desan, and he is engaged in a plot to infuse the Force into crystals in order to synthesize Force powers, to create a dark side army. In order to do this, he would need the power of the Valley of the Jedi that Kyle guards. This is a plot that Kyle and Jan are ironically investigating and finding out about. This kind of feeds into another theme in the game of destiny versus free will. We'll get into that a little bit later. Regardless, these fates are intertwined when ultimately Kyle comes into contact with the Dark Jedi.
Blast them, Kyle!
Kyle? Kyle Katarn? You're the legendary hero who destroyed Jarek at the Valley of the Jedi. You look like nothing more than a bantha herder.
Well, you look like an overgrown Kowakian monkey lizard, so I guess looks don't count for much. Hand her over.
You desire this woman? Come, take her.
Ah, Sith spit.
Enough of this charade. You're pathetic, Katarn. As a Jedi, you might have proven a worthy adversary. But without the power of the Force, you're not worth the effort it would take to strike you down. Perhaps your woman will prove to be of heartier stock. She certainly couldn't be any weaker than these colonists.
Don't you touch her.
On second thought, Tavion, kill her.
Kyle!
Jan!
Besides the fact that he turned Kyle's world upside down in a matter of minutes, Dasan also just happens to look like what Barney the dinosaur would look like if he was a Sith Lord. But in all seriousness, you see, Dasan was also a student of Luke Skywalker, and much like Kyle, was given a chance to explore a certain part of himself until he found an alternative identity that he ultimately embraced.
If the ways of the Jedi were easy, there'd be millions of us instead of dozens. Take Dasan, for example. He was born on a planet unused to the wonders of the Force, where his seemingly magical abilities caused him to be feared and shunned by those around him. His childhood was one of loneliness and despair until a visiting trader discovered him, recognized the Force within him, and brought him to the Jedi Academy.
So he was a student.
Yes. For the first time in his life, Dasan was at peace. He'd found beings who liked him for who he was, beings who encouraged him to develop his talents. Over time, however, things changed.
How?
He became cold, severe. He belittled his fellow students for what he perceived to be their weaknesses, and argued, sometimes violently, with his teachers. During a training session, he struck down and killed a fellow student in cold blood. Dasan said he was too weak to be a Jedi. He fled before we could counsel him, and he has not been heard from since.
Until now.
Yes.
We see a parallel between the two after learning this. Both Kyle and Dasan were presented with choices about where to place their identity. Both of them decided to reject the Jedi for different reasons. Both are confronted with the consequences of those actions. Obviously, their will is an important aspect of each character's motivation, but the fact that their fates are intertwined is an interesting coincidence. Ultimately, Dasan's goal in killing Jan was to force Kyle to expose the location of the Valley of the Jedi in the pursuit of taking back his Force powers and getting revenge. This does beg the question of whether Dasan knew he would run into Kyle, or whether it was just an impromptu decision. Regardless, Kyle is confronted with this choice, and he makes it in spite of the mentors around him cautioning his decisions.
What are you doing, Kyle?
Don't try to talk me out of this, Father. I need the power of the Valley of the Jedi, and I need it now.
Do you believe that this stream of power will ease your pain? Or that you can safely wield the Force with anger in your heart?
Jan is dead. My anger is all I have left. Anger and revenge.
Is that how she would want to be remembered? With acts of anger and revenge?
No.
Then remember her as she was, and may the Force be with you.
It hasn't been so far.
Kyle.
Yeah?
I just wanted to say how impressed I was with your performance in the trial. Considering how long it's been since you used the Force, I almost expected you to fail outright.
Well,
You've been to the Valley of the Jedi.
yes.
Kyle?
I know what I'm doing, Skywalker. If I'm going to defeat Desan, I'll need the full power of the Force, and I can't afford to spend years of my life retraining myself here.
Kyle, I realize you're in pain, but you must learn to anticipate the consequences of your actions. You and Jan swore an oath to protect the Valley of the Jedi, and now that Jan's dead, you're the only person who knows where it is. If you should fall to the dark side, you could use the Valley's power for unspeakably evil purposes.
Are you saying I can't be trusted?
I'm saying that I want you to let go of your anger before it destroys you.
I don't know if I can do that. But I will give you the coordinates to the Valley of the Jedi, just to be safe.
Well, that's a start, I suppose. Take one of the Academy's vessels to Nar Shaddaa. It'll be less conspicuous. Don't worry. I'll take care of the Raven's Claw until you return.
We get a juxtaposition of setting from the peaceful, serene temple on Yavin to the gritty underbelly of Nar Shaddaa. This is not the first time Kyle has interacted with this unsavory place, as it has been a point of conflict for him in his mercenary past. It is almost as if the surroundings are symbolic of the darkness that Kyle is dealing with internally. We see immediate evidence of this in his interaction with the bartender. He is aggressive and not f***ing around. After an annoying conflict when asking too many questions, Kyle finally receives the location of the gangster that he is tracking down. This, interestingly, leads to a meetup with a familiar face. We come face to face with Lando Calrissian, a man who can't seem to stay away from mercenaries. I love how the voice acting is actually done by Billy D. Williams himself, and the reprisal definitely feels super organic because of this fact. Lando continues on the trend of being a supportive character who is not trying to force the main character's hand. After they are able to make their escape and take out the gang leader, we get to see a juxtaposition of rationality and emotion in how the two characters want to approach the upcoming conflict on Cloud City.
While you were sleeping, I hailed a New Republic base on Sullust. They haven't shown much interest in our little smuggling problem in the past, but now that they know remnant forces are behind it, they're eager to pitch in. A strike team should be arriving on Besman within a few hours.
No!
I thought you'd be happy to.
They'll tip off Desan.
Then we'll catch them later. Getting Desan isn't as important as clearing the city.
Jan's dead, Lando. Desan and his minion killed her.
Greif, I'm sorry, Kyle. Okay, here's what we'll do. I'll drop you off on the lower levels. They've probably been overrun by remnant troops, so watch out. Chances are that Desan's operating from one of the loading bays above level 10, but you'll never get in without the proper access codes. Try to find Carbonite Chamber 17. I've hidden an old R5 unit there with codes to every loading bay in the city.
You always did plan for the worst.
Ever since that run-in with Vader. Anyway, I'll head up top and gather some old friends from the security force. We'll work our way down towards your position. If we're lucky, we can trap Desan before the New Republic arrives.
Notice how Lando empathizes with Kyle's situation, and after learning of the motives behind his actions, helps to support his ability to complete his mission. Obviously, Kyle's emotions are dictating his will, but Lando is once again a representation of mature support. Just like Luke, he takes on the approach of a friend who is willing to listen and allow their friend to process things naturally. The Force is obviously inspired by Eastern philosophy in many ways. Its dark and light side are a direct reflection of the yin and yang concept. However, there is another Eastern idea that is embodied by Kyle's destiny in this game. This is the idea of karma. Star Wars is a conduit for many Buddhist/Hindu philosophies, but I think this one is the most applicable to Kyle's situation. The inciting incident of Jan's death led to his emotions dictating his will. As a result, we see him come against roadblocks that force him to be patient with getting the result that he wants. It's almost as if a person's actions and intentions have consequences, and that good actions often lead to good outcomes, and bad actions often lead to bad outcomes. That's the definition of karma, by the way. His goal, as he articulated to Lando, was to find Desan in Cloud City, but instead he comes face to face with Tavion. Now, maybe this is some karmic retribution for her, given that she was the one that struck the blow, But it's also interesting that while Kyle is in such an angered state of mind, he has to confront the lesser threat and a weaker mind. A mind that gives him information that changes him, ironically for the better. It's almost as if the Force is protecting Kyle in a parental way, giving him not too much to handle but still being able to point his emotions in a certain direction. On the other side of the coin, we see that Kyle can quell his anger to an extent by sparing Tavion after she obviously tries to weasel her way out of death, spilling the beans on where Kyle must go next.
She lives! I can tell you where she is!
Liar! I saw her die!
Think. What did you really see? What did you really hear? Do you believe we'd risk killing one of the only two people who knew the location of the Valley of the Jedi?
Where is she?
That... Hauler will take you to our base in the Lenico Belt. That's where Galec's ship, the Doomgiver, is docked. It's also where he's keeping your woman for further interrogations.
Why should I believe you?
Because I'm not brave enough to die!
Get out of my sight.
What?
You heard me. Go and pray that I find your master before he finds you.
Maybe the Force was protecting both of them, knowing that they both still had choices to make going forward. Although, we won't be able to run into Tavion until the next game, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. This news also gets to alleviate some of Kyle's helplessness, because he learns that his best friend is still alive. At least, allegedly. Lando even gets to share in this positive news as they say farewell, optimistically perking up when hearing Jan is alive, as well as wishing that the Force be with Kyle, to which Kyle responds,
"We'll see."
Obviously still a little salty, Kyle is beginning to become a little bit more balanced in his state of mind. Luke notices this immediately when he runs into him on the asteroid belt.
Something's changed in you. You seem less angry.
Maybe. There's a chance Jan may still be alive on the Doomgiver.
Sometimes even a small hope is enough to defeat the dark side, Kyle.
Listen, Skywalker, there's even more to this than you think. Desan's working with a remnant scientist named Gallic Fyar. They're smuggling something called cortosis here from Bespin.
Damn, that's not good.
Why?
Well, cortosis is a rare mineral that resists lightsabers.
Great.
I'll try and find out what they're doing with the cortosis. You find the Doomgiver. If you run into Desan, don't try to take him on alone. Now that he's been through the Valley of the Jedi, he'll be more powerful than ever.
Don't worry, I'm not totally crazy.
May the Force be with you, Kyle.
Yeah, you too, Luke.
Obviously, much more level-headed. His thoughts of facing Desan without any forethought are slowly dissipating, and he's starting to embrace the Force once again as a positive ally. Unfortunately, Desan comes into conflict with Luke, and escapes while nearly taking Luke out. Kyle witnesses this, and his first communication with Luke after the fact is to reiterate what Luke just said about facing Desan alone.
Kyle, are you there?
Yeah, I thought you said not to fight Desan alone.
I didn't have a choice. I never even felt him coming. He's escaped onto a ship.
I know. I'm on it.
The rational, slightly sarcastic Kyle seems to be back in working order here, and even more so when he finally gets to meet up with the person that he thought he lost. We even get a callback to Luke rescuing Leia by how she's laying down in prison.
I thought you were dead.
Dead? No. In pain? Yes. Desan and his thugs must have burned out half a dozen interrogation droids trying to get me to crack.
They wanted to know about the Valley of the Jedi, right?
For the first few hours. Then they dropped the subject and started asking me about the layout of the Jedi Academy.
The Jedi Academy?
Yeah, Desan seemed obsessed with it.
Oh, no.
What?
I think Desan's invading the Jedi Academy. We've got to destroy the Doomgiver's shields before he can deploy his troops.
I think I know where it is. Let's go!
Now that his fears have been quenched, he's motivated to keep surviving, thriving, and live another day with Jan by his side. Just the motivation he needs to take out a ridiculous-looking science officer in a goofy-looking lightsaber-resistant piece of armor.
Worlds will tremble. Stars will shudder.
Your shields will fall.
Always a good sign when Kyle's sense of humor is intact. We finally get a little bit of actual Star Wars in Star Wars, and Kyle is ready to confront his last objective, but not before sharing a moment. It's great that we get to have this right before the final confrontation because it reminds us that hope and love are Kyle's motivators now. Now that hope and love exist because he was able to process his anger and come out of a traumatic situation fighting for good. Going into the pits of the Academy, we get to see the juxtaposition to this and how Desan decided to use his anger to motivate him.
Welcome, Kyle Katarn. Welcome to the future.
Your future's looking pretty grim, Desan.
On the contrary, thanks to you, the weakling Jedi who scorned me will soon be erased from history, replaced by a new race of warriors. Strong warriors, warriors who know that the Force is not a shield to protect the useless, but is in reality a weapon to empower the worthy.
None of that's gonna happen, Desan. Most of your shadow troopers are being mopped up by real Jedi, ones who've been trained to use the Force. The rest blew up with your ship.
What a pathetic ruse. Desan to Fayar. Admiral? Admiral! Admiral Fayar, I order you to come in at once. I was wrong about you, Katarn. Your failure as a Jedi hasn't weakened you. It's only made you stronger. Come, join me. You know in your heart that you'll never truly be one of them.
Maybe, maybe not. But I know I won't be alone. How about you, Desan? Even now, after all this pain, it's not too late. Come, join us.
You weak fool!
The conflict doesn't end with Kyle making some quip, or saying anything at all, really. It's just a quiet moment of realization of the consequences of one's actions. Like I said earlier, the Force is very much a conduit of karma in this game. Desan gets laid to rest at the very academy where he slew his fellow Jedi, and Kyle runs back to focus on the good things in his life.
Kyle, Jan.
Someday you're gonna have to teach me how to do that.
Thanks for taking care of the Raven's Claw.
It was the least I could do for the pair of mercenaries who saved the Jedi Academy. I know you've probably heard this before, but the New Republic is forever in your debt.
You should have known it would take a failed Jedi to take out another failed Jedi.
Kyle, you were never a failure.
Luke,
I know. I'll be happy to hold your lightsaber for safekeeping.
No, I think I'll keep it.
Ha! I knew it! Lando owes me 5 credits.
Are you sure this is what you want, Kyle?
Look, I'm not saying I'm ready to join the Academy or anything like that. I mean, before I do anything, I figure that Jan and I have earned a long vacation on the beaches of Spyra. And after that, well...
After that, we'll see.
Yeah.
Take your time, Kyle. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Thanks, and may the Force be with you, Luke.
A solid but relatable character arc, if you ask me. This is why Kyle Katarn tends to be one of my favorite Jedi. He really embodies Aristotle's concept of the golden mean. This is a principle of moderation as it relates to moral behavior. The idea is that the virtue is found in the middle ground between two extremes, and that an excess of any one extreme is detrimental to the idea of a balanced life. It was a lesson that Luke Skywalker had to learn throughout his trilogy, and I think it's fitting that his most notable student in the expanded lore, before Disney took over, was a sarcastic, down-to-earth mercenary turned Jedi. Well, he is influenced by the mystical nature of the Star Wars universe, unavoidably. Kyle embodies very much the free will of mankind, and how that will be used for good or bad. Ultimately, he chooses good. But if things turned out slightly differently, perhaps he would have gone down a darker path. At the end of the day, that's what makes him relatable. He's one of the most human Jedi that I've ever had the pleasure of digesting in a piece of Star Wars media, because he feels like one of us. Let me end this essay with a quote from the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre that I think sums up this game's protagonist in a nutshell. Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. It is up to you to give life a meaning. Thanks for watching, everyone. I intend to continue my look into the Jedi Knight series by digging into the sequel to Jedi Outcast next. If you would be interested in that, please subscribe and keep an eye out for it. If you enjoyed this essay, a like would be most appreciated to help the video get out to other fans of these games. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for coming to the Dutch Ritz party.